The first time it happened, I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. I had recently moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the buildings were old and the hallways always smelled faintly of damp carpet. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and at the time that was all I cared about. My job at the gas station paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, and most nights, I didn't get home until after midnight. The building was quiet at that hour. Too quiet. On my first night there, I remember unlocking my door and noticing another door at the end of the hallway slowly closing. I assumed it was just another tenant heading inside for the night. I didn't think anything of it. But the strange part was that every single night after that, the exact same thing happened. I would walk up the stairs, reach the hallway, and right as my keys touched my door, the door at the end of the hall would slowly shut. Not slam, not click, just gently close. At first, I thought the person living there had a routine similar to mine. Maybe they also worked late. Maybe they just happened to go inside at the same time. But after about 2 weeks, curiosity got the better of me. One night, I walked down to the end of the hall and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I leaned closer and noticed something strange. The door frame was dusty, like no one had touched it in a long time. Then I saw the number plate on the door. Apartment 304. That apartment had been listed as vacant when I signed my lease. I went downstairs the next morning and asked the landlord about it. He frowned. 304? Nobody lives there. I laughed nervously and told him I saw the door closing every night. He stared at me for a long moment before saying something that made my stomach drop. That door's been locked for 6 months. I didn't stay in that apartment much longer, because that night when I got home from work, the door at the end of the hall wasn't closing. It was slowly opening, and someone inside whispered my name. The second story happened to a friend of mine named Daniel. He told me about it years ago, and even now he refuses to drive through rural areas at night. Daniel used to work as a delivery driver. One evening, he had a route that took him through a stretch of highway that cut through dense forest for nearly 50 miles. No houses. No gas stations. Just road and trees. It was close to 1:30 in the morning when he noticed something standing near the shoulder of the road. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then the headlights got closer, and he realized it was a person. A woman stood there in the dark wearing a long pale dress. Her hair hung down over her face, and she wasn't moving at all. Daniel slowed down. He rolled the window halfway down. "Are you okay?" he called out. The woman didn't answer. She didn't even react. She just stood there. Daniel said something felt wrong immediately. The road was completely isolated. There was no reason for someone to be standing there alone. He started to pull away. Then the woman lifted her head. Her face looked completely normal except for one thing. She was smiling too wide. Not a friendly smile. A stretched, unnatural grin. Daniel drove away fast. But about 10 minutes later, as he checked his side mirror, he saw something that made his heart nearly stop. The woman was standing in the middle of the road behind him. The same white dress. The same smile. And somehow, she was much closer than she should have been. The third story came from a security guard who worked the night shift at an office building downtown. His name was Marcus. Marcus had worked there for nearly 3 years, and nothing unusual had ever happened. His job mostly involved sitting at a desk watching security cameras and occasionally walking through the empty floors to make sure everything was locked. One night around 3 a.m., he noticed movement on one of the cameras. Floor 6. The camera showed someone walking down the hallway. Marcus frowned. The building should have been completely empty. He zoomed in. It was a man wearing a dark coat. The strange thing was that the man wasn't walking normally. His movements looked slow and stiff, almost like he was struggling to keep balance. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and went upstairs. The hallway on floor 6 was silent. Empty. But as Marcus walked toward the far end, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly. No one there. He continued down the hall. Then the footsteps started again. Slow. Heavy. Right behind him. Marcus spun around with the flashlight raised. Still nothing. Then he heard the elevator ding. The doors opened at the end of the hallway. A man stepped out wearing a dark coat. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. because the man looked exactly like the person he saw on the security camera earlier. The only problem was, the camera still showed that same man standing at the other end of the hallway, watching him. The fourth story happened to a couple who had just bought a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house had been on the market for a long time, which they thought was strange, because it looked perfectly normal. The first few nights were fine. But then the scratching started. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., they would hear scratching coming from inside the walls of their bedroom. At first they assumed it was rats. They called pest control. The technician checked every wall, the attic, the crawl space. Nothing. No animals. No nests. No signs of infestation. But the scratching continued. Night after night. Always at 2:17. Then one night the husband woke up and noticed something different. The scratching wasn't inside the wall anymore. It was coming from the closet. Slow, deliberate scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood. He walked to the closet door and opened it. Inside was nothing but clothes and a small crawlspace hatch on the floor. The hatch was slightly open. He didn't remember opening it. He slowly lifted it. The crawlspace beneath the house was pitch black. Then he heard breathing. Someone was down there. The final story is one that still bothers me the most. A college student named Laura shared it on an online forum years ago. She claimed everything that happened to her was real. Laura lived alone in a small off-campus apartment while attending university. One night, she woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Unknown number. It started with a sound that didn't belong. The highway was almost empty that night. Only the distant glow of headlights appeared once every few minutes, quickly disappearing back into darkness. I had been driving for nearly 3 hours, trying to reach a small town where I had rented a cheap motel room for the night. My phone battery had died earlier, and the GPS with it, leaving me with nothing but road signs and guesswork. The forest on both sides of the road felt endless. Tall trees crowded together so tightly that my headlights barely pushed the darkness back. That was when I heard it. A faint knocking sound. At first I thought something had hit the underside of my car, maybe a loose rock. But the knocking came again, slow and deliberate. Knock. Knock. It sounded like it was coming from the trunk. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I told myself it was probably something shifting in the back, maybe the spare tire or the toolbox I kept there. But the sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, my headlights cutting through the trees like two pale blades. The forest looked completely still. No wind. No animals. Just silence. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the trunk. Each step felt heavier than the last. The knocking had stopped. I hesitated with my hand on the trunk handle. My heart was beating so loudly, it almost drowned out everything else. Then, just as I started to lift the trunk, knock. From inside. I slammed it shut and jumped back, breathing hard. I didn't open it. I didn't even look. I got back into the car and drove the rest of the way, without stopping once. When I finally reached the motel, the first thing I did was open the trunk. There was nothing inside, except for the spare tire. And 3 long scratches on the inside of the trunk lid, like someone had tried to claw their way out. The second story came from a coworker of mine named Aaron. He used to work night security at a large warehouse on the outskirts of the city. His job was simple. Walk the property every hour, check the doors, and watch the security cameras in the small office near the loading docks. One night around 2:30 a.m., he noticed something strange on the monitor. One of the cameras showed a person standing near the back fence. The strange part was the way they stood completely still, not shifting, not moving, just standing there facing the camera. Aaron grabbed his flashlight and went outside to check. The cold air bit into his face as he walked across the empty lot. The only light came from a few flickering lamps mounted on the building. When he reached the fence line, no one was there. He scanned the area with his flashlight. Nothing. He went back to the office and checked the monitor again. The person was still there, standing in the exact same spot. Aaron frowned and looked closer. The figure looked wrong. Its arms hung slightly too long. Its posture was stiff, almost unnatural. Then the figure slowly lifted its head and looked directly into the camera. Aaron felt a chill run down his spine. because the face wasn't clear, but he could see the shape of a wide grin. A grin that didn't look human. The next thing that happened made his stomach drop. Another camera feed flickered on the screen. The one pointing toward the office door. And standing outside the door was the same figure. The third story happened to a woman who lived alone in an apartment building that was older than most of the city around it. She had just moved in and hadn't even finished unpacking yet. The first night she slept there, she woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps above her. Slow pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. She assumed someone lived in the apartment above her, so she tried to ignore it. But the footsteps continued for hours. The next day, she mentioned it to the landlord. He looked confused. "There's no one living above you," he said. She laughed nervously, assuming he meant the neighbor had recently moved out. But he shook his head. "The entire top floor has been closed for renovation." That night, the footsteps came back. This time louder. The pacing sounded heavier, like someone walking slowly, with deliberate steps. Around 3:30 a.m. the footsteps stopped. She was just starting to fall asleep again, when she heard something else. A soft creaking sound, directly outside her bedroom door. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly. Very slowly. She sat frozen in bed, staring at the door. The knob twisted halfway, then stopped. The door didn't open. After a few seconds, the knob slowly returned to its original position. The footsteps above her started again. Back and forth. Back and forth. The next morning, she went upstairs to look for herself. The top floor hallway was dark and filled with construction dust. But what she saw there made her blood run cold. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the dust. Leading from the stairwell to the exact spot above her bedroom. The fourth story was shared online by a man who used to work as a late-night taxi driver. One night, he picked up a passenger around midnight. A young woman standing alone near a deserted bus stop. She got into the back seat without saying much and gave him an address on the other side of town. The ride was quiet. Too quiet. The driver tried making small talk, but she barely responded. He noticed something strange when he looked in the rearview mirror. She was staring straight ahead. Not at him. Not at the window. Just straight ahead. Her expression never changed. When they reached the address, the driver turned around to tell her the fare. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. He slammed on the brakes and checked both doors. They were still locked. No one had opened them. Confused and shaken, he drove away. The next morning, he checked his dash camera. The video showed the woman getting into the back seat. But during the ride, she never moved once. Not even when the car turned. She sat perfectly still the entire time. Then, just a few seconds before they reached the destination, she slowly turned her head and stared directly into the camera. Her eyes were completely black. Then she vanished. The final story came from a college student who shared his experience during a late-night study session at the campus library. The library stayed open 24 hours during finals week, but most students left before midnight. By 2 a.m., he was the only one left on the second floor. Or so he thought. The quiet was so complete that every small sound echoed between the tall bookshelves. Page turns. Chair creaks. Distant humming from the fluorescent lights. Around 2:40 a.m., he heard something that didn't belong. A whisper. He looked around, expecting to see another student. No one was there. He went back to studying. Then the whisper came again. Closer this time. He couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone speaking softly right behind him. He turned quickly. Empty chairs. Empty tables. He stood up and walked slowly between the bookshelves. The rows stretched far into the dim corners of the floor. That was when he noticed something strange. One of the shelves had a book sticking out slightly. When he pushed it back into place, the whisper came again, right next to his ear. Clear this time. Don't leave. He spun around, heart pounding. The aisle was empty, but as he looked down the row of shelves, he noticed something that made him freeze. At the very end of the aisle, someone was standing there, a tall, thin figure in the shadows, completely still, watching him. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached the front desk. But when he told the librarian what he saw, she slowly shook her head. You're the only one here tonight. He insisted he saw someone. So, they checked the security cameras together. The footage showed him sitting alone at the table,
studying,
looking around nervously, standing up, walking through the shelves, and then suddenly running. There was no one else visible in the entire library. But just before he ran, the camera picked up something strange. A shadow, standing directly behind him, and whispering into his ear.